We all wonder about the Neanderthals. They were a lot like us. They lived in Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. They were strong. They were smart. They made tools. They buried their dead. Then, about 40,000 years ago, they were gone. And around that same time, our ancestors, Homo sapiens, were spreading across those same lands. It makes you think, did we do it? Did we push them out? Or did something else happen? Were we just in the right place at the right time? It's a big question. It's not easy to answer. We are talking about things that happened tens of thousands of years ago. We don't have written records. We don't have interviews. All we have are bones, stone tools, and clues left in the earth. But those clues tell a story, and scientists have been trying to read that story for a long time. First, let's think about who the Neanderthals were. Forget the old caveman images. They were not stupid brutes. They had big brains, often bigger than ours. Their bodies were stocky and muscular. This made sense for the cold climates they lived in. They were powerful hunters. They used spears, probably for thrusting, getting close to big animals like mammoths and woolly rhinos. That took courage and strength. They knew how to control fire. They made sophisticated stone tools, often called Mousterian tools. These were good tools, sharp and useful. They lived in caves and temporary shelters. They shared food. They cared for their sick and old. We know this because we find skeletons of Neanderthals who lived with serious injuries, like broken bones that healed. Someone had to help them. Someone had to feed them. This shows compassion, a very human trait. They probably had some form of language. How complex it was, we don't know. But they communicated. They passed on knowledge. Some evidence even hints at symbolic thought, like collecting bird feathers or making simple ornaments. They were not us, but they were not so different either. Then there's us, Homo sapiens. Our story starts in Africa. We evolved there. We were also smart. We also made tools. But we were built a bit differently. Our bodies were generally taller and more slender. We were built for long-distance running, for moving across landscapes. Our tools were often more varied. We made blades thinner and sharper. Later, we made tools from bone and antler. We started making things like needles, which tells us we were making clothes, perhaps sewn together for better warmth. We started making art like cave paintings and small figurines. This is a clear sign of complex symbolic thought. Around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, our ancestors started leaving Africa in bigger waves. They spread into Asia, then into Europe, and this is where our paths crossed with the Neanderthals. They had been in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. It was their home. We were the newcomers. So what happened when we met? Did we fight? Did we just coexist for a while? Did we even breed together? The answers are complicated, and it's probably not just one thing. Let's look at the idea that we Homo sapiens were the reason they disappeared. This is the we killed them argument. It's a tough one to think about, but it's a real possibility. One idea is resource competition. Imagine two different groups of people needing the same things to live. Food, water, good places to shelter. If one group is just a little bit better at getting those things, the other group will suffer. Some scientists think our ancestors were just better at exploiting resources. Maybe we had better hunting strategies. We might have used projectile weapons like spears thrown from a distance, or even bows and arrows later on. This would let us hunt big game more safely and efficiently than Neanderthals, who likely used thrusting spears, meaning they had to get dangerously close to their prey. We also seem to have had a broader diet. While Neanderthals were expert big game hunters, we ate more fish, birds, rabbits, and gathered more plants. This means if the big game animals became scarce, we had other options. If a bad winter hit, we could switch to something else. Neanderthals might have been more specialized, and specialization can be a weakness when times get tough. If their main food source dried up, they were in trouble. Then there's the idea of technological superiority. We mentioned tools. Neanderthals made good tools, but our stone tools, often called Upper Paleolithic tools, were often lighter, more varied, and more efficient. We could get more cutting edge from the same amount of stone. We made specialized tools for different jobs. Like those needles, for example. Better clothes mean better survival in cold climates. We also started using bone, antler, and ivory for tools. This expanded our toolkit. These small advantages over thousands of years and many generations could make a big difference. They could mean more successful hunts, better chances of surviving winter, and more children living to adulthood. Another factor could be social networks and demography. Our ancestors seem to have lived in larger, more connected groups. We moved across wider areas. This meant more opportunities to share information, to trade goods, and to find mates. Bigger networks mean more resilience. If one group struggled, they could rely on others. Neanderthal groups seem to have been smaller and more isolated. Small populations are very vulnerable. They have less genetic diversity. They are more likely to die out from random like a few bad winters, an epidemic, or just not enough people to find mates. Imagine a small group of 50 people. If 10 die from an accident or illness, that's a huge loss. If a group of 500 loses 10, it's barely a blip. We also might have had a higher birth rate. Even a slightly higher birth rate for us over many thousands of years would mean our numbers grew while theirs slowly shrank. And then there's the uncomfortable thought of direct conflict or warfare. We know that humans throughout history have often fought over resources and land. It's not a stretch to imagine that our ancestors, upon encountering another group of hominins, might have competed aggressively. Maybe there were skirmishes, maybe there were full-blown fights. If we had better weapons, or just more people, we might have pushed them out of the best territories. There is very little direct archaeological evidence for this kind of warfare between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Early humans weren't always peaceful. It's a grim thought, but one we can't completely rule out. So that's one side of the coin. We outcompeted them, outsmarted them, or even fought them. But there's another side. The idea that we just got lucky, that external factors, not necessarily direct conflict, led to their decline. This is the we just got lucky argument. Climate change is a big one. The time period when Neanderthals disappeared was a time of significant climate instability. The Earth was going through glacial and interglacial periods, but also rapid, short-term climate shifts called Dansgaard-Oeschger events. These were dramatic swings, from cold to warm and back again, sometimes within decades. Neanderthals were well adapted to cold, but rapid, unpredictable changes are hard for any species. If the climate kept changing quickly, their traditional hunting grounds might have shifted, their prey animals might have moved or died out. This would put immense stress on their populations. Some scientists argue that while Neanderthals were strong and adapted to cold, our ancestors were more adaptable. Our broader diet, our more varied tools, our larger social networks, these might have made us better at handling rapid climate shifts. If a forest turned into grassland quickly, we might have been better at changing our hunting techniques or finding new foods. Neanderthals, with their more specialized approach, might have struggled more. It wasn't about us actively harming them, but about us being better at rolling with the punches the environment threw. Then there's the idea of disease. When two populations that have been separated for a long time meet, they often carry different diseases. Each population has some immunity to their own local bugs, but they might have no immunity to the diseases the other group brings. Think about what happened when Europeans arrived in the Americas, bringing diseases like smallpox that devastated Native American populations. It's possible that our ancestors coming from Africa carried pathogens that Neanderthals had never encountered. If these diseases spread through Neanderthal populations, already stressed by climate change and perhaps dwindling resources, it could have been another nail in their coffin. They might have succumbed to illnesses that we were mostly immune to. This isn't us killing them on purpose, but an accidental biological consequence of our meeting. Demographics and genetic factors also play a big role in the lucky argument. Neanderthals had very low population numbers. We know this from genetic studies that show low genetic diversity, meaning they were probably always a relatively small population spread across a vast area. Small populations are inherently more vulnerable to extinction. Even if things are mostly good, a series of bad years, a few random deaths, or a slightly lower birth rate, and their numbers could slowly decline. We, Homo sapiens, seem to have had higher population densities and more connected groups. This gave us a built-in advantage. We were more resilient. We could bounce back from setbacks easier. And then there's the fascinating and complex story of interbreeding or assimilation. We didn't just meet them, we mated with them. Genetic studies show that most people of non-African descent today carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in their genome. This means that our ancestors, Homo sapiens, had children with Neanderthals. It wasn't just a one-off event, but something that happened over generations, probably in the Middle East and Europe. And this changes the picture significantly. If we interbred, it means they didn't just vanish into thin air. Their genes, their legacy, live on inside us. So, in a way, they didn't completely disappear. They were absorbed. Their distinct population disappeared, yes, but their genetic material continued. This isn't killing them in the violent sense, it's more like a slow genetic mixing. If our populations were larger and theirs smaller, then over time their genes would become diluted within our bigger gene pool. Their distinct physical and cultural traits would fade away as they became part of our larger group. This is a form of extinction for a distinct population, but it's a very different process than direct warfare. It suggests a more complex interaction, perhaps even a peaceful coexistence for a time, leading to intermarriage. So, which is it? Did we kill them, or were we just lucky? The most likely answer is that it was a combination of many things. Life is rarely simple. It wasn't a single event. It was a long process spanning thousands of years. Imagine the scenario. Our ancestors arrive in Europe. They find a land where Neanderthals have lived for a long time. They are both intelligent, capable hunters, but maybe we have a slight edge in some areas. Maybe our tools are a little more versatile. Maybe our social networks are a little more robust. Maybe our diet is a little more varied. At the same time, the climate is unstable, putting stress on both populations. Neanderthals, with their smaller numbers and perhaps more specialized way of life, feel the pinch more acutely. They are already at a disadvantage when the rapid climate changes hit. Maybe a few bad winters mean fewer Neanderthal babies survive. Our slightly better technology or social support means we ride out the same bad winters a bit better. Over hundreds of years, these small differences add up. Their numbers slowly dwindle. Our numbers slowly grow. They might be forced into less desirable territories. Maybe sometimes there were conflicts over hunting grounds. Maybe sometimes people from both groups met, fell in love, and had children. Those mixed ancestry children would likely be raised in the larger, more robust Homo sapiens groups, further integrating the Neanderthal genes into our population. So it wasn't a sudden, dramatic war where we wiped them out. It was a slow, grinding competition combined with environmental pressure, demographic vulnerability, and perhaps some interbreeding. We didn't need to be evil or particularly malicious. We just needed to be slightly better adapted, slightly more resilient, and present in slightly larger numbers. The environment did a lot of the work, stressing all hominin populations, and our particular set of traits, developed over hundreds of thousands of years in Africa, happened to be better suited to survive those stresses and outcompete other groups. What does this all tell us? It tells us that extinction is rarely simple. It's often a complex interplay of factors. It also tells us something about ourselves. We are incredibly adaptable. We are good at surviving. We are good at spreading. And we are also good at changing the world around us, sometimes in ways we don't fully understand until much later. The mystery of the Neanderthals continues to fascinate. Every new archaeological find, every new genetic study adds another piece to the puzzle. We are still learning about these remarkable people who shared the earth with our ancestors. Their story is part of our story. It reminds us of how fragile life can be, how important adaptability is, and how one species can replace another, not always through violence, but often through a slow, relentless process of competition and change. We didn't necessarily kill them in a direct genocidal way, but our arrival, our presence, our way of life, and our ability to adapt meant that their distinct way of life simply couldn't continue. We were the rising tide and they were gradually submerged. It's a sobering thought. It makes you wonder what kind of mark we are leaving on the world today.